If you are a regular listener to The Sociology Show, then you could help with the costs of promoting and hosting the podcast. If you can spare even a small amount, then you can donate on the GoFundMe.com website by searching for The Sociology Show. There is no obligation, of course, and all future downloads will continue to be free. A huge thank you to all those that have already donated. Your kind gesture will help to continue keep the show going and growing. Best wishes and keep enjoying the show.
Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and in each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research and their experiences. So put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. My guest for this episode was Dr. Tess Bartlett, originally from New Zealand, now working in Melbourne. Tess's work focuses on the areas of fathers, families, imprisonment, identity and masculinity. I found this really interesting interview. If you are interested in anything to do with the area of crime and deviance, this will be of interest to you, but also anything to do with gender and gender identity, masculinities and so on. And so without further ado, let's go over to the interview. Hi, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to the podcast. Do you want to start by introducing yourself, please?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Tess Bartlett and I live in Melbourne, Australia. And I have worked in various research roles at Monash University for the past 8 years or so. But in the last year, the most recent role was a research fellow at the Monash Gender and Family Violence Prevention Centre. But I just finished up there and I'm actually going on maternity leave. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us today because you're about 9 hours ahead of the UK at the moment, I think.
Yes, we are.
And what's your background and history in the subject of sociology, Tess?
So I'm originally from New Zealand and I studied sociology and criminology as an undergrad at Victoria University of Wellington and was really interested throughout my undergraduate degree in the sociology of punishment and also in masculinities. And so in my honours year, I did some research around homophobia in New Zealand and the use of language and that kind of thing in schools and how that kind of perpetuates hegemonic masculinities and how it all links to hate crimes and things like that. And then from there, I actually did a master's, which was more criminology focused, but it was really looking about the sociology of punishment as well and explored penal populism in New Zealand. And a lot of the research I've done has been quite interdisciplinary, so it crosses sociology and criminology, social work as well. And then, my PhD as well did the same, so it was really across disciplines and looked at fathers in prison. So I think sociology itself has always kind of been woven into my research, even though I would probably say it fits more in the criminology field, but it's very much crosses both. Yeah.
Great. And we'll come back onto some of your own research in a moment. I was just intrigued at how big is sociology in New Zealand? Is it taught in schools? Is it compulsory? Is it an option? How does it work?
So in terms of schools, I'm actually not sure if it's taught in schools at the moment. Like it wasn't when social studies is taught. So I don't know if that's really classified as the same thing necessarily. But yeah, you can, it's in terms of university, you do a degree in sociology just like you would in, criminology or in the arts. So yeah, it is.
Right. And I assume it's the same sort of kind of topics and areas that you cover if you were to study a degree in Britain or America or anywhere else, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of the things that I remember looking at were things around the family, which I always found really interesting, and that's probably linked to why I went on to do a PhD looking at fathers. But yeah, stuff around families and family structure and punishment and social structures and how they're all kind of interwoven and interrelated. And so those are the things that I remember really standing out for me anyway.
Great. And what kind of really inspired you as well when you were researching? Was there a particular theorist or perspective that really got you interested in the subject?
So I think Raewyn Connell's work around hegemonic masculinity really influenced that, and that early work that I did around homophobia in New Zealand. So, because that was a while ago now, so it was probably like 12 years ago or something. So I was a lot younger at the time. And I just remember that really standing out to me as something that I thought was really intriguing and interesting, and that kind of gender practice within society that assumes or kind of allows men's dominance over women, and how it can really influence people's behaviours, but also assumptions about that kind of thing. And then as well as that, I think, if I'm to kind of leap forward a little bit and look at my later research and work that I did, that came into it again, but it was almost kind of looking at how we can look outside of that. So how else can we look at masculinities in prisons specifically? And so in that instance, some of the work, Rose Ricciardelli, Katharina Meyer and Kelly Hannah Moffat, they wrote some stuff around softer masculinities, that kind of, different models of masculinities, if you like. And I found that really, really interesting, and it was quite a central kind of notion in my own research from there as well.
Great, thank you. And let's go into your own research then. So do you want to give us a kind of brief overview of the type of areas that you're looking into for your research?
Yeah, sure. I guess where I can start is that I did a PhD. So I finished my PhD in 2000 and it was conferred in early 2019. And that was looking at primary care fathers in prison and their experiences of arrest and imprisonment. And so I interviewed 39 primary care fathers who were primary carers before they went to prison, obviously. And some of the, findings that came out of that, if I'm thinking in a sociological area, if you like, is that, we're relating to masculinities and identity and prison identity and having a fathering identity. And so how people can actually, or how men in prison specifically, can really nurture that fathering identity rather than kind of getting involved in the prison environment, and so being able to nurture that, what can kind of come from that. I mean, some of the stuff that I really drew on as well was Irving Goffman's stuff around the front stage and backstage personas and identity in the self. So I kind of developed this idea around, okay, well, if people go into the prison with this backstage self, which is more kind of a nurturing or fathering self, then what are they doing in the prison environment? And it's kind of in the visiting room in particular, they're kind of forced in some ways because of the environment and the space and everything around them. They're kind of forced to take on this identity that's more a prisoner identity, if you like. Well, there's a bit of a conflict between the prisoner and the father inside them, and kind of going, who am I meant to be right now? What am I meant to be doing? And they found it really difficult to just be with their children, and naturally kind of do things that they would do, because obviously they're in an environment that's very different anyway. So that's kind of some of the stuff that came up around that, and actually talking. I found that for some of the men, talking on the phone was actually in some ways easier to be in a role of father, because they were able to listen to their children. They were able to kind of be in that backstage self, or that fathering self, where they can just listen and talk about homework and offer advice, or whatever it is that they felt they needed to do, because it was more of a private space in a way. Yeah, and then also some of the work at the Monash Gender and Family Violence Prevention Centre. I'm, I guess, as well, really interested in systems and structure and how they take into consideration primary care of fathers, like, for example, at the point of arrest, or when someone's being imprisoned, or even just punishment or programs for men, and then how masculinities can be kind of how they're expressed in those different environments as well.
Yeah.
So
it's quite interesting what you're saying about the Goffman idea as well. So is your research showing that still men have this kind of persona to present, this hegemonic masculinity, even if on the inside it's quite a different way in which they want to act? Why is that the case? Why do men still have this need, or feel they have a need to present in a certain way?
Well, I think in the prison, probably simply because of the space itself. Yeah. So because it's a very controlled environment, there's, everything is done within a structure, within a system. So in some ways you're kind of immediately put into that. But at the same time, what my research did kind of explore was that men do have agency in how they model different versions of themselves, or express, that's the word I'm looking for, kind of express different masculinities for themselves. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're kind of have to be one way or the other, but it's like they might actually choose, okay, well, this is the safest thing for me to be doing at this time, so that's what I'm going to do. And so I think the spaces and the systems are one thing, and then you've also got the internal thing going on at the same time. So, for people talking about fathering was like things that they felt they wanted to be able to do, or to feel, or to listen, so a lot of emotional stuff as well that came out. But yeah, very much impacted by the physical space that they were in. Yeah. I can't remember if I answered all your questions.
No, that's great. Because one of the things that often comes up, it's often debate between psychologists and sociologists, actually, is the whole nature-nurture thing, and whether how much of males' behaviour is biological, driven by testosterone, etc. How much of biology relates to masculinity?
It wasn't something I actually explored in any detail. What I can say, I guess, from my perspective, was that it was more around, it's the same for people outside of prison as well. Like, it's not just for people in prison, it's the same for anyone, is that all these things are constantly changing, evolving based on our circumstances, based on where we are, based on the people we're around. And so I think that, and I'm definitely not a psychologist, so I'm not kind of coming from a point of thinking I know about the biology of it, but it's more about saying, that these things are fluid and kind of malleable, if you like, so they can change. They do change. I know from a personal experience that my own sense of identity has changed incredibly in the last, 15 years of my life. So why would that not be the case for someone else who's in prison, So I think that those things do develop and change in environment and space. So physical spaces are really going to impact that as well.
Because I'm just wondering, research shows around the world that somewhere in the region of 80% of crime is committed by men. Each country has got slightly different, but it's normally within that kind of region. How much of that is pushed by society, the expectations to be masculine, to present in a certain way?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure I know the complete answer, but I think that my partner and I were actually just talking about this the other day. There was a rugby league player in Australia playing league, and during the match something happened and he started crying, and all these people on Twitter were making fun of that.
Yeah.
And to me that's a real indication of masculinity in a society, is when people are kind of mocking a man doing something that every human being does. And so I think it almost that pressure on males in particular to hide emotion and to push it down and to not express it can really have detrimental consequences in terms of things like family violence and things like that, because not being able to express how we're feeling in a way that's kind of healthy. So looking towards ways that we can do that in a way that's healthy would be a wonderful thing to do within society, because I think, this constant need to be really, manly and stoic and all these things, it doesn't necessarily allow for that full expression of emotion and feeling in a way that's healthy to themselves, but also people around them and around us.
Yeah, it's amazing that argument's still coming up in 2020, because you would have thought we'd reached a point where men can be more open and expressive about their emotions, but totally. Actually there is, like you said, there's still examples of men being mocked for crying or showing too much emotion, not holding it together. That still seems to exist.
It's crazy. It's really, it blows me away that even, like, I was quite shocked that people were making fun of someone crying. Like, it just, to me, seems so backwards. But I try and call that kind of stuff out as much as I can, because I just think that it's not in some ways it's just shaming people. So I think it does. I don't know in terms of correlation or causation or anything like that, but I do know that in terms of, if we're thinking about social, as you mentioned, crime, and what are some of the factors, well, I think some of those deep things within us around expressing ourselves and being able to, communicate and do all the things that people want to be able to do, not being able to do that in a way that's kind of to use the term healthy, but it could be just productive maybe, then can lead to things which aren't necessarily beneficial for ourselves, but also the people around us.
Yeah, for wider society as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tess. That's going to be the end of part 1, and in part 2 we'll talk more about your research. Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the Sociology Show. I'm talking to Dr. Tess Bartlett. Tess, could you tell us a little bit more about your research, masculinity and identity in prisons?
Yeah. So I think one of the main things that came up for when I was, exploring fathers in prison, and in particular primary carer fathers, was the notion that for these men, there was a whole range of models of masculinity that they felt they were able to kind of draw on, and they didn't tell me it in those words exactly, but it was more that they kind of felt that, okay, well, here in this environment I'm going to be playing with my children, but here I can't because there's no toys, there's lots of prison guards standing around, there's lots of I can't actually connect with my children in the way that I'm used to. And so in this way, it's like they were able to draw on a different part of themselves that they needed to in that moment. And I think there's a lot of, there's a tendency in prison masculinities literature to really focus on the hypermasculine prison environment. And a lot of research has developed in that area, rightly so, because it is a very masculine environment. But what I guess I argue is that there are softer versions of those masculinities within the prison and vulnerabilities within the prison, and that people and men in prison do have agency and are able to draw on those different models of masculinity when they see fit. And I guess the issue with that is that while they would like to be doing those things, so while they'd like to have the opportunity to parent their child in terms of parenting programs or support programs, or learn more about fathering or aspects of fathering, they were given very little opportunity to do so. So there are lots of assumptions as well just around primary carers in general, and that doesn't stop when people go into prison. So while a larger percentage of women in prison are primary carers, because the number of women prisoners is smaller, if we think about it that way, there are also lots of men in prison who are fathers, and the number of men in prison is enormous, compared to that. So and what it means though is that a lot of women in prison are given a lot of mothering programs, as they should be, but men aren't really given, it's quite gendered. So men are kind of given, I'm trying to think of working programs of some sort, as opposed to family-based things. And so I think it was around 2/3 of the men had never been offered any parenting support. And so while a lot of them said, when I asked them, is there anything that you would like to see happen? Most of them said, well, it would be great if we could have some sort of support or parenting program that would tell us a little bit more about parenting, or we'd be able to learn stuff or do something, as opposed to just not really doing anything. So there's a huge opportunity for people to be able to really nurture that side of themselves that is a father. And there's research as well that, as well as mine, that kind of shows that family and identity that's not linked to the prisoner, not linked to the prison, is an incredible way of helping people post-release.
Yeah.
So if you can anchor positive things that are associated with family or with parenting, or for other people it could be art or whatever, then that's going to actually assist them when they leave the prison. Yeah, to me, I just think what a missed opportunity, really. If we're thinking about, if the aim is to reduce the number of people not only in prison but also returning to prison, then surely we should be kind of focusing on family and doing things where, and clearly the men really wanted that, to see that, but most of them just said, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. They just hadn't heard about it. Yeah, quite incredible.
So is that more effective for females in prison then? Do they have lower re-offence rates, for example, because they want to get back to the family as soon as possible?
Not necessarily, actually. And a lot of women in prison are there for very minor offences.
Yes.
So I guess there's differences in terms of who are in prison to begin with for the two different groups. I think that the programs for women in prison are more focused on things like family. But unfortunately, there's a huge amount of women in prison that shouldn't even be in prison to begin with. So yeah, that's a whole nother argument, I guess, to be made for why they are there in the first place, and why are they not at home doing community, with their families. So yeah, I think it's kind of hard to compare them both, but yeah.
Because I also wondered at the other end as well, when they're being sentenced. I don't know how true this is, but are females who are mothers less likely to receive a prison sentence because they are a mother, whereas a father is still likely to get that sentence?
Yeah, well, Shona Minson from the UK has actually done quite a bit of research around mothers as well, primary care mothers in prison. I think the thing is that in Australia anyway, family hardship, I hope I've got the term right, is meant to be taken into consideration when sentencing. So any hardship on your family is one of the things that is a consideration. Now, some people have said, okay, yes, the judge did mention that, but others said, oh no, they just didn't even factor it in. And so I don't even know if in Australia there's actually been. I was part of a project that looked at primary care parents overall, so mothers, primary care mothers and primary care fathers in sentencing. And unfortunately, the stuff around sentencing didn't reveal a huge amount in terms of whether that was taken into consideration. So I think it's an area that really needs a lot more exploration in Australia anyway, because it's a really, really important consideration for people who are primary carers, and because if you're thinking about it in the bigger picture, there's children involved. So what is happening to those children? And I know for the men, the primary care father men, there were even, if you're thinking about policing and some of the processes and involved in arresting someone, that was one of the things that came up in my research, was that men were just not asked if they were a primary carer of children by the police, because I guess there were assumptions that there would be someone else to look after kids, or the mother was a primary carer. And so what then happened is that because that first question wasn't asked, well, they also didn't say, okay, well, is there someone to look after your children? Do you have a suitable carer? And a lot of the time they didn't have a suitable carer to look after their children. And so some kids were kind of staying with neighbours or friends. And like, that's just a hugely traumatic experience for those children involved. So if you think about the scale that's happening on for fathers, but also for primary care mothers, that's just, incredible, the amount that would be happening. And so having clear processes in place to be able to say, are you a primary carer? Do you have suitable care for your children? Yes, no, what should we do then? Okay, let's move on with doing what we need to do. Yeah, those things are really, really important and crucial for kind of lessening the trauma on the children as well.
So how much, I know your focus is more on the males, what sort of contact do male prisoners get with their children on a weekly or monthly basis?
Yeah, it's really dependent on first of all, the crime they might have committed, but also, so say if we're talking about people who are, because all the men in my study had not committed any kind of sexual offence or anything towards their children. They were immediately excluded. So, it was really dependent on things like whether they could get someone to actually bring the children to the prison, which is often 2 hours away from where the family or the carer. So a lot of the people in this instance didn't have, like, the person caring for the child would be a grandparent in a lot of cases. So a grandparent or a family member. So not necessarily their mother, or it could have been a stepmother, or so it was a whole range of different people. And so if the relationship between the mother and father has conflict,
Yep.
then that also really impacts whether children will visit the prison in particular. But in terms of things like phone and letter writing, that happens quite frequently, and they can have, it's dependent on, phone is dependent on money essentially, because it's very, very expensive actually to call to call someone in prison, and often calling from mobiles and things. So yeah, but that does happen quite often. But the visits can be anywhere. Some people had never had a visit, just because it was too far, or because of conflict between the carer and the person in prison. And then others would see them once a week kind of thing. So it was a huge range of how often. And there's just so many factors, cost as well. And also things like, what do you actually, so if you're traveling all day to get somewhere, then do you have to stay there overnight? Do you have to, how do you pay for it all? Do you get support to do that? Are the visits only for 2 hours? Sometimes they turn up and there's problems, and so they can't even get a visit. It's just not very supportive for families visiting as well.
So maybe I could make this the last question then, Tess. Could you tell us what programs are already in place, and then also what needs to improve?
Yes. In terms of programs in place, very little.
Yes.
So there's one that was called Read Along Dads, and that is a great program for fathers in prison, and they read, or maybe it is called Read Along Dads. I think in the UK it's called Storybook Dads, so it's the same kind of concept. They read a book and they record the book, and then they send a copy of the book and also the recording to their children, and the children can listen to their dad reading the book and read it at the same time. And so that's been going for a while, and the people who had done that really, really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, it wasn't at some of the prisons, and so yeah, a lot of them kind of said, I wanted to do that, but then they moved me to another prison, so I couldn't. So there was that, and I think there's a generic kind of parenting program. It's just called parenting program. I don't even know if it's got a name.
Yes.
And I think it's just very basic skills around parenting. So I don't think it's even very. There's not much data on this. So if I'm sounding hazy, it's because it's very hard to find any information on any of these programs apart from Read Along Dad. So the only information is the people who I interviewed who had done them, and that was only a handful of people. There are other services though that some of the men had been able to access. So Salvation Army, for example, send Christmas cards and birthday cards and things to children, and the same as Prison Fellowship. But I guess in terms of face-to-face kind of really engaging programs, not really, like nothing. Yeah. And one of the models which I find really quite amazing is was developed in Wales, Invisible Walls Wales. That's what it's called. It was a pilot program, and they housed fathers in units with other fathers, and within that they had really and so this was predominantly minimum security prisoners, I believe, and so people were with other fathers, and so they had things like an area where partners could come in with their babies and kind of learn things around washing them and bathing them, and it's just a completely different environment. So the whole unit was kind of dedicated to family and parenting. And it's just, to me, that, that being able to nurture goes back to that identity, and being able to really draw on those things that you can then go leave the prison and really feel connected to that part of yourself. So even just having programs where fathers and children can really connect in a way that feels, obviously there's safety considerations and that kind of thing, but there are the other one I actually missed was a family day. So several of the men had done what's called a family day, and I think it's a 2-hour visit where a carer comes and brings the child, and then the carer actually doesn't attend the family day, so it's just fathers and their children, and they have an extended visit where they can go and play on the playground or read books or whatever it is. And a lot of the men really felt that was really useful and said, if we could have more of that, that would be really good. So I think it's not even necessarily saying we need a whole new range. It's more saying, how can you build on what's already there? So that family day, why not put that in every prison? Or the read-along dads. I know that is slowly moving into different prisons, which is fantastic. Shine for Kids have little play art areas where fathers can, and mothers as well, can be with their children and do art, painting and things. So actually working with what you have, rather than saying we need to develop this whole other idea, just kind of building on what's there and offering it to more people. That's as simple as it needs, that's as complex as it needs to be.
And it just sounds so logical, doesn't it? Because you increase the bond between parent and child, and hopefully the reoffence rate goes down. I mean, it just seems so logical.
Yeah. It really does. So, that, and I guess that's the frustrating thing. It's going, if only the people who are making these decisions could see that simplicity in it. And I know there are people who can and are trying to make those things more central, but it's a very hard push, if you like. So but I hope it happens, because it's very important and would make such a huge difference.
Let's hope so. Thank you, Tess. Could you just tell the listeners where they can read more about your work or get in touch with you at all, please?
Yes, so if people want to follow me on Twitter, I am there, and I am TSC Bartlett, so TSC BARTLETT, probably because I'm quite active on Twitter as well. So from there, it's got other places you can find me as well. So it's probably a good starting point.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today, Tess. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.